Welcome back to this belt building series where we're going to continue on today finishing edges, marking and punching our holes, as well as attaching hardware. As a bonus, I'm going to use our tooled sample to show you how I do a lined belt without a sewing machine. So this is going to be a glue down construction that will actually last and hold up so you can do a nice finished project without having to have a sewing machine. This has been such a fun series so far, and I really appreciate all the questions and comments from the earlier videos. I love hearing how much you're learning and how much confidence you're gaining. Like we've been talking about so far, building big leather projects is not one skill in itself, but it's a stacking of small skills. So the better we get at those little skills, the better foundation and the stronger foundation we have to build bigger projects on. And I love it. As we learn more of those skills, we gain confidence and are able to tackle bigger and more complicated projects. I know one of the big fears when you're getting into leather work is not knowing what to use, maybe not having the right tools. And having the right tool for the job is valuable. But hopefully you're learning through this series that knowing how to use those tools or knowing how to get by without those tools, that part is priceless. Let's head over and finish these belts up, but be sure to stick around with me till the end when I tell you what is coming next. Our next step on this belt is going to be to round these edges. The tool that we use in the shop for that is called an edger. Now this tool is awesome because we hold that at a 45 degrees, so not flat, not all the way 90 here, but 45. And we push along that top edge, and you can see how that's actually cutting off part of that leather there, just that corner, and starting to round that. So we can work this down all the way in small sections here, watching the angle on that tool. If we go too high this way, it's going to want to gouge in. Too far down here and it won't actually cut. So it's just getting a feel for that and getting the right angle. Now we can do that on the front side and the back side. So I'm going to run down our back side with that same tool. Now we have that nice rounded edge. It still has a little bit of a rough feeling though, so we can get that smoothed up. I'm going to use some sandpaper. There's a sanding block, and here's an actual just piece of sandpaper. And we can start going right along that edge and sanding that down. Now, what if we don't have an edger, but we still want a rounded edge, but we don't want to invest in an edger yet? You can do this whole thing with your sanding block. This is something you pick up at a hardware store, and we start sanding that down. Well, we're going to work our way down this belt. After we've ran that edger, we're going to sand that up a little bit. I like stepping up in grits, so we go from a rougher one. This is probably maybe a 240, 320, somewhere in there. I don't remember exactly what I grabbed. And this is up to this is a 400 right here. And that's going to smooth that out even more. Get a really nice smooth edge there. All right, now that we're finished sanding that, we got two more things we're going to do to the edge here. Next thing I'm going to do is add some dye. We're going to use a color called Cordovan, just a darker color. You could use a dark brown, anything. I just think having some contrast in here is going to look really good. Now on these edges, let's go to another inexpensive applicator, the same thing we were using before, that foam chip brush. That's going to work good on these edges. Now, I have my dye set in that bigger container, but that's a Fiebing's leather dye. You can see now, I come with these longer strokes here to help us keep a nice, even, clean line on that front edge. The last thing I want to do on these edges is slick them down. So I'm going to use a product called Gum Tragacanth. You don't have to do this step either, but it really adds to your product. I'm going to use a scrap piece of canvas here, and that's what's going to help burnish this edge. So once we have our product on there, now I can start actually slicking that. So using pressure in, I'm kind of squeezing with my fingers a little bit as well. We're going to push in and rub that canvas down there, creating some friction, and that's going to help slick that belt off. It's working our gum trag down into all those fibers and getting us a nice polished off slick edge to that. So you can see now as I rotate that, you can see that shine on the light, and that feels really nice and smooth. Now that our edges are slicked up on there, let's look at punching our holes, setting our snaps, measuring and punching our end holes down here, and then we're going to come back and stack on some more skills and show you how to put a liner on our tooled section here. So we marked these holes from the get-go right when we laid this out in part 1 of this series. The first punch we're going to use is one that's about 1/8 of an inch wide there. This is going to be for our snaps. So our 4 snap holes that we marked, we'll punch those straight up and down with your punch, making sure you're on a cut surface, not on your marble. The next punch we want to do is this oblong hole right there for the tongue of our buckle to come through. And what I want to use is a 1-inch bag punch, so what that's called. Now when I started out, I know I sure didn't have one of these. This didn't get added into my tool bag for a long time, so I'll show you how I worked around without that tool. We're going to take a punch, it's about 1/4 of an inch across there. We're going to go out to the end of where we marked this. I'm going to punch each end out. Now that those 2 holes are punched, we're going to take our straight edge, working right along the edge here from hole to hole. I'm going to cut along there. I want to be careful not to overcut, so I'm going to cut from each direction. Now we have that oblong hole cut out there. What about our holes down at the end of the belt? We said that we weren't going to mark those when we originally cut this out because I want to make sure that my sizing is exact, especially if you're tooling this leather, wetting it down, drying it up. If you have any amount of stretch or shrinkage, we want to not have that affect how this belt's going to fit. So if you remember back to part 1, we measured out, we're building this to be a 34-inch belt. Now that measurement is going to go from the fold where your buckle attaches, so out here on the end, the center of that oblong hole, down to the center hole. So we're going to slide this down so you can see where we're measuring at. Now on this end, just using my scratch awl, I'm going to come to 34, kind of eyeball center of the belt there, and push that down. So now we have a mark for that center hole. Now a big question came up to me from a few different people about when we were sizing that belt, what about the buckle? How do we account for the buckle? The best way to get a measurement on the belt is to ask somebody to measure their current belt. The current belt they're wearing from the fold to the hole they use the most, and that's what we make the center hole. The idea is that they're putting the same or a similar buckle onto their new belt. The reason why we take the hole they use the most and put it in that center hole is to have a little bit of variance there. So in case somebody does change to a different style of buckle, we still have room on either side of that hole. So when we look at actual buckle styles, the difference that we're looking at can vary. We have 2 different trophy style buckles here, and they have different measurements. Because when we measure this heel bar buckle, the measurement from where that tongue goes to the bar down here, that's 1 3/4 inches. When we measure from the fold to the pin on this one, the way this one attaches, we're 1 1/4 inches. So this buckle is actually 1/2 inch shorter than this buckle. You wouldn't think that by looking at them. This style here, from the fold to that center pin, is 3 inches. So this is 1.25 inches bigger than this one. Now, with those buckle variants in there, we're talking about less than 1.5 inch variance from the small to the biggest one. And now that we have our center hole mark down here, I like to use a 5-hole pattern. So I'm going to come out each side of this center mark 1 inch this way, 1 more inch, so 2 inches. Coming back from center hole, we're going to go 2 more holes this way and mark it. So now we have, from center hole, we have 2 more inches either way to go to account for that variance in there. Now for punching those holes, I'm going to just grab this hole punch that we just used. That one's about 1/4 inch. The snaps that we're going to use on this are line 20 snaps. There's line 20 and line 24s. The line 20s are a little bit smaller than the 24s, but they set the same way. There's 4 components to these when you look at them. Each one has a cap there. It's the rounded cap with a post. And then there's the back cap, I guess you'd call it, but this one has a post there. But the back one is flat. That front one's the nice rounded one. The other 2 components are going to match up accordingly. The easy way to figure it is the one that's flat on the bottom goes with the flat piece here. The rounded one goes with the cap. We want the cap here on the front. If this is going to fold, we want the caps there. So I'm going to put the cap in. Now, we want to make sure that that's sticking through there. We're going to need to skive this down a little bit. We have our marble right here, and I'm going to use my skive to thin this down. Again, the reason for thinning that is so that we can have that post sticking through there. Now, easy way to get that to thin down, using that sponge with a little bit of water on there. It's going to help that cut a whole lot nicer. So now with my knife, my skiving knife here, we can simply take a little bit down where these 2 caps are. And that's going to work just fine for getting those posts to come up through there. Now we have enough post peeking through there. So that's all we really have to do. These other posts come to the end of the belt, and they're long enough that they look through there already. Personally, I don't like having just the 2 divots out of there though, so I'm going to take a minute and we're going to even this up a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to show you on the next belt that we line where I do this in the process for all the belts that I build, but I wanted to come to the snap setting spot to show you why I need that to be thinned out there. The fold on here, and that's a lot of people think that we're skiving down just for that fold. This leather's not that thick. We could have folded just fine without skiving that. So the big purpose that I have it for is for our snaps. Now let's go back and put those caps back in there like we did to start with. Now that cap is rounded, it's going to fit into our little concave setter here, the little anvil part of that, really nice. We're going to take the rounded actual snap portion of that, push that down onto where that post is. Now with our setter, that's going to go right down into that post, and we're going to be mushrooming that post out over our snap, but I'm going to hold that snap down with my 2 fingers there. Almost, I tend to do it with my middle finger and my thumb, and then this pointer finger can help steady my tool. as we hit that down. And you can see that mushrooms, that post over that snap and holds it on there. Now for setting the other ones, again, those posts are going to go in from the same side, so that way our snap mechanism can be on the inside here where that needs to snap at. Now our anvil's rounded on that side, flat on this side. This is a flat piece with that post, so I'm going to flip that over to the flat side. We'll put that down, set them just the same. Now that those snaps are set, before I just crank this down, I don't want to fold that all the way because I don't want to break the finish on here or put any cracks in that leather. So as I start to fold that, I'm going to have my sponge with some water and I'm going to lightly wet that down as I'm folding that together. Now I can squeeze that down now that some moisture's gotten in there. Always check those snaps. I'll snap them and unsnap them a couple times. Make sure everything's set right in there. Just take our buckle, push that tongue through there, and we can snap those in place. As you've seen so far, we've stacked together some skills enough to be able to build our basic Western belt here. Now let's stack on a few more skills and show you how to finish this one out. We've already stacked on some extra tooling skills, but we're going to add a few more and get this to where it's a lined belt that we don't have to stitch. So first off, that tape that's on the back, we had taped that when we tooled to avoid any stretching in that. It's time that can come off here. When we did our snaps here, remember we had to have that leather thin enough that our snap post could fit through there. The same thing on this one, especially a little bit more because it's going to have to go through that liner as well. So let's get our stone over here. I look to see where our holes are marked at. Then we'll flip over. We're going to come a little bit above that and make sure that we skive that all down. Get that a little bit wet. That's going to help that leather cut a little bit easier. And we'll start with this skive, starting on my edge and working my way across this belt. Now rather than just skiving out where those first couple snaps were, like we did on the last one, we're skiving this like I do on all of my line belts, where we're going to skive this whole end down here, and we'll feather that down a little bit to where it's nice and even after we line that. All right. Now we've thinned that down, we can look at putting our liner on there, and we're going to have enough room to still get those snaps through there. This is going to be a glue down construction. The glue you use is important. For this type of construction, it needs to be a contact cement. There's other types of glue you can use throughout regular leather work, but to do a glue only construction, this needs to be a heavy duty contact cement here. The brand I prefer and use all the time is Barge all-purpose cement. There's other contact cements at the hardware store you can use as well. We're going to turn this over, and I want to get a good coat. Now, before you just skip over this video and say, oh, I got it, I just glue this down, there's a little more to just gluing it down. Because again, we're not just gluing this and holding it in place till we stitch it. We're gluing this, and we want this to hold in place for the lifetime of this belt. So you can see I'm working down, getting a nice even coat. I'm not slopping it on super heavy. I'm spreading it out really nice. And we're going to get the back side of this glued all the way down here. And I'm going to set that aside, and we're going to glue the back side of my liner as well. And you see I've got good coverage all the way to that edge. I've covered all the way out there. I haven't left any uncovered spots. Now we're going to do the same thing again on the back side of this liner, and we'll get this covered with the same amount of coverage there, thinning that out as we go. Once I do that, I'm going to set these aside and let them dry completely. Now we've given that time to dry. It is completely dry to the touch, both sides of that. We're going to come back with another layer of our contact cement. Each side we're going through with another coat. Again, this coat's just a little bit lighter. You can see that's already wanting to stick to my fingers really good. But I'll put this light coat on. You can see I'm putting it on. It's shiny there. It's shiny and wet where I just put that on. We're going to let that dry completely again on both sides of this. Now that these have dried for a second time, completely dry to the touch again, we're going to come back with an extremely light coat on one side. So I'm going to go on my belt side here and pull that really thin. Now we're going to let that sit just a minute until that tacks up. Okay, check that again. That's starting to get really sticky and tacky just on my finger there. So we can still see a little bit of that shine to it, but it's not wet. Now we can lay this pattern down onto our liner. When I line a belt, I start at one end, I lay that down, keep a little bit of pressure here to keep that straight as we start laying this down. Now this is a 3/4 ounce liner that we're using. Remember, we started with an 8/9 ounce belt. That liner is wider than our belt for good reason. Okay, we don't want to try to just line up two pieces that are the exact same width. Now that this is on here, I'm going to go with that flat face hammer. We're going to work just around that border edge here, all the way around this belt. Next step is going to be to trim those edges. So I'm going to go back to my box knife. This is what I prefer. And we'll trim this liner away from here. When I do that, keep my blade right next to my belt, straight up and down, making sure I'm not tipping this and undercutting that belt. Really important here. Keep that straight up and down and right next to our belt. Now we have that liner trimmed. We're back to the same point we were on our first belt, that now we can start working to round these edges, sand them down, we'll dye those edges, and slick them up. And those parts are really important now that we're getting that edge sealed up with those two pieces in there. It's really important with this glue down construction to take the time and get that sanded down super fine. You can't hardly see that seam in there. A really big step in this. Now once that's sanded down, we can go on and get this dyed. Once we have our dye, we're going to come back again with our gum trag and get this edge slicked up. When we slick this with the canvas, even more important than before, we really want to get that edge sealed off good. So that means with your canvas, I'm putting in that extra effort, making sure I'm kind of pinching together as I'm rubbing that edge and getting that good seal across both layers of our belt there. So then when we're done, we're not going to be able to even hardly see a seam in there. Once we get those edges slicked off nice, we're down to the same steps we were on the other one, punching holes, setting snaps, and punching our holes down here. As you can see by now, building a strong foundation of your basic skills is going to give you more confidence and allow you to do a bigger variety of projects. In my next video, I'm going to have an offer for you, and you need to watch it if you're ready to take your leatherwork to the next level. Be on the lookout for my next email, as this is going to be a limited time offer. If you're not on our email list yet, click the link below and be on there so you don't miss out on what's coming.